My guest today is Hans Labohm, who studied economics at the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. In 2007, Hans was an expert reviewer of the AR4 assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC. That is the one that shared half of the Nobel Peace Prize with Al Gore.
Chronicles of Climate Hysteria is a book which has recently been published, also available in the United States. And it is actually a compilation of articles which three of the authors, which I mentioned on top of the page, have been written over the next 2 decades. It's very interesting, I must say, and it deals with what it says, the climate hysteria or the climate debate over the past 2 decades. Well, climate fear. Well, actually, it has not always been global warming, the fear-mongering. In the 70s, we had the big freeze, the fear-mongering about a cooling of the Earth. Now, the fear-mongering still remains, but it has changed to global warming. And that started somewhere in the 80s, 90s, and it's still going on very strongly these days. Should you panic? Well, according to the media, we should panic. The media are always, I would say daily, confronting us with fear about global warming. All people know that it is very dangerous, a situation, but we are still waiting for the climate emergency. Actually, the climate is warming a little bit, but there are many fluctuations of temperatures. And indeed, the last few years, there is indeed a new spike in warming. But let us first look at what most people think and most people believe about global warming. Most people believe that there is an imminent climate emergency. And everybody knows that global temperatures are rising at accelerating pace. And this is primarily because of anthropogenic CO2 emissions or man-made CO2 emissions because of the use of fossil fuels. Sea level rises at an alarming speed. The Arctic will soon be ice-free, as we so frequently hear. Glaciers are melting, and there will be millions of climate refugees. Biodiversity will suffer because the global warming and frequency of weather extremes will increase. The polar bears risk to become extinct, and developing countries will be most seriously affected by climate change. And all scientists agree. And, the fear-mongering goes on and on. And now for something completely different, the facts. This is the graph, satellite-based temperature graph, which is designed by Christie and Spencer. And it's the most accurate temperature curve which we know. And what we see is indeed a modest increase in temperatures, but as from 1998, we see actually, fluctuations, but not a very important and not a very frightening increase in temperatures, with the exception of the end. And there we see indeed a very steep peak. I will come back to that later. Currently, we are witnessing a spike in the average worldwide temperatures. But has this anything to do with that, with CO2 of whatever origin, natural or human? Most probably not. climate scientists are attributing the spark to the emissions of water vapor into the atmosphere by the eruption of the Hunga Tonga volcano. And for the future, to the next few years, they expect a decline in solar activity and also a maximum of the solar cycle number 25 and future ocean current shifts of the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation. And therefore, we may expect another global temperature drop or hiatus or pause, temperature pause, which is similar to the one that ended with the 2015 super El Nino. Here we see two curves, and temperature and CO2 over a very long period, millions of years. And what we see is that the atmospheric CO2 curve is declining, not increasing. And even close to the present, the decline still continues. As far as temperature is concerned, we see fluctuations. But what we do not see is a correlation between the two curves. Now, a couple of decades ago, the result of measurements of the so-called Vostok ice core were published. And there we see, on the top, we see the CO2 concentration in parts per million, and we see down the temperature change from the present in Celsius. And what we see is actually a kind of pas de deux. And when the scientists some 2 decades ago studied this graph, they came to the conclusion that there was a strong correlation between CO2 and temperatures, in the sense that CO2 determines temperatures. But when the measurements became more accurate and more precise, it appeared that the CO2 did not precede the temperatures, but did follow the temperatures with a time lapse of about 800 years. And this was, of course, sensational in the sense that they lost actually a very strong proof, between inverted commas, for their hypothesis that CO2 determines temperatures. Now, how do you make an AGW alarmist? AGW stands for anthropogenic or man-made global warming. And if you look at part of the data for a shorter period, then you see indeed a correlation between the various curves. But if you look at a longer period, then you see something completely different. Look here, correlation has disappeared. And indeed, CO2 concentration in the atmosphere is increasing. It is the green curve. But the temperature, which is the red curve, shows a lot of fluctuations and shows a rise and a decline and a rise and a decline. So there is no correlation actually seen over this period between the two. Sometimes when I'm lecturing, I am asking my audience how what the volume of CO2 in the atmosphere is, and what they think what the percentage is. Now, I get often answers in the neighborhood of 4%, 5%, even 10%, 20%, and 40%. And then I tell them that it is not so much. It is only 0.04%. So that's very little. This is the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. It is measured in Hawaii, in Mauna Loa. That is a volcano. And there is a measuring station. And it shows a steady increase in the CO2 concentration. But as I said before, the concentration is still very, very low. It is only 0.04% of the atmosphere. And what is striking here is that the increase, the rise in the concentration of CO2 is linear, almost linear, and not exponential. And that is to say that the story which we often hear from climate alarmists that there is an alarming increase of CO2 in the atmosphere is simply not true. They say that there is an exponential increase. That is to say that every year the increase is greater than the year before. And this is not the case. It is almost linear. Now, here see we a cluster of models, and the red curve represents the mean of the cluster of models on which the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, bases its predictions. And the curves down under show the real measurements. And what we see is that there is an enormous gap between the alarming predictions or projections of the cluster of model outcomes and the real measurements. The real measurements do not show an alarming picture. They show, indeed, a slight rise in temperatures, but there's nothing alarming. Now, sea level rise. We also hear very often alarming stories about sea level rise. The sea level rise is indeed occurring, but at a very modest pace and also linearly. That is to say that there is no acceleration in the rise of sea levels. And here we see one gauge, which is located in Vlissingen, that is in the Netherlands. It's typical for all the gauges over the world, and it shows an increase of only 20 centimeters per century. Now, here we see two curves. One curve, both curves are linear. One curve is the curve for the previous measurements, and the second curve is a curve for the more modern measurements. And what we see here is indeed some acceleration, but both curves are linear. So there is in the single curves no acceleration visible. Global sea ice, there were predictions in the past. Al Gore was one of them, who predicted that there would be no sea ice on the poles anymore in, I believe it was 2010, as he predicted. And indeed, we see a yellow curve here, which shows a decline in sea ice. And what we also see is a red curve, and the red curve represents the latest measurements. And we see that the red curve is above the yellow curve. The yellow curves indeed suggest a decline in sea ice, but we see in 2024 again a recovery in the extent of sea ice. So no alarm there. But we have had ice-free North Poles. On the 18th of May, 1987, this picture was taken, and it shows a couple of submarines, American submarines, who came to the surface on the spot of the North Pole. That is to say that, indeed, yes, in summer, it may occasionally be so that the North Pole is ice-free, but over the last few years, that has not been the case. Now, is there a risk for loss of biodiversity? It's often argued by climate alarmists that biodiversity will be adversely affected by global warming. But that is not true, because global warming is good for biodiversity. The biotope in the tropics is infinitely more diverse than on the poles. So that means that we should also reject this argument, which is often heard. And then the glaciers are melting. Yes, glaciers are melting. But then when the ice retracts, we see that there are trunks of old trees coming to the surface. And that means that the glaciers have not always been there. As a matter of fact, glaciers started to retreat around 1850. And that was before the period, say 1950, when mankind started to inject quantities of CO2 because of the burning of fossil fuels into the atmosphere. So there is actually a divergence between the period when the glaciers started to retract and the period when the increase in CO2 concentration of the atmosphere took place. And then, what happened? This is a so-called Iceman, or Ötzi, as he is called. And he died there some 5,000 years ago. And he was a hunter. And probably he was caught by bad weather. But anyhow, it was not probable, it was not likely that he was hunting there on a glacier. So in the past, 5,000 years ago, these glaciers were not there. It was probably green and was probably barren, but glaciers, no. He was found in the Alps, in the northern part of Italy. This is a picture of the tremendous amount of climate refugees. These were predicted some 20 years ago. There would be millions of climate refugees, but so far we have not been able to detect one climate refugee. Of course, there are refugees, but that has nothing to do with climate. And then climate-related deaths. Both natural climate variations and between inverted commas, man-made climate variations caused death, human death. And what we see here is that over the last century, the number of climate-related deaths have come dramatically down. And the non-climate-related deaths you see here on the curve below. And that means that mankind has improved the means to deal with climate-related weather extremes, or just to weather extremes, whether or not climate-related. And that means also that adaptation is more possible, proves better results than all kinds of measures to reduce the output of climate emissions. And then the weather extremes. The weather extremes do not show any tendency. They fluctuate. They do not show any correlation with CO2, CO2 of natural origin or of man-made origin. And here you see the number of hurricanes per decade and the category, the intensity of hurricanes, and you see that they are declining. And the same applies to forest fires, to droughts, and to floods, and all the kinds of weather extremes. So also the argument that weather extremes are increasing because of CO2 emissions of mankind or of natural origin is false. And then the polar bears. When Al Gore was born, there were 7,000 polar bears, and today there are only 30,000. So also that is a fairy tale. It's not true. Polar bears are thriving, and that has to do with the reduction of polar bear hunting. That's of course a very good thing, but polar bears are not on the verge of extinction. And these are the specific estimates of polar bear population. And you see that there is a tremendous surge in the number of polar bears. And, well, you could compare it with rabbits. And then, of course, one often hears that the developing countries are more seriously affected than the Western developed world. But according to the vast majority of climate models are not capable to produce reliable long-term projections. And according to all climatologists, it is not yet possible to derive reliable regional projections from global climate models. So also we should reject this argument. And all scientists agree? Well, that's the question. But the point is that they have touted different opinions about the future of the climate. In the 70s, they thought that there would be an ice age by the year 2000. And in 76, they predicted that global cooling would cause a world war by the year 2000. And then later on, at the end of the 80s, they turned to global warming and rising sea levels, and it will wipe entire nations off the map of the Earth. And then the rainforests were also a very popular argument. We have 5 to 10 years to save the rainforest. The Himalaya glaciers will be gone in 10 years' time. It was written in one of the reports of the IPCC, and they had to retract it because it was not true. And in the year 2000, it was predicted that snow will soon be a thing of the past. And there's still a German climatologist who repeats this message every year. Then in 2007, there was a statement that global warming would cause fewer hurricanes. And 2008, the Arctic will be ice-free by 2013. 2012, global warming will cause more hurricanes. And then, of course, what we always hear is that the science is settled. But this isn't true. The science is far from being settled. So as an economist, I'm not a climatologist. My impression of all this climate debate, is that the science is not settled and that there are still very big gaps in our knowledge of the climate system. Nevertheless, climate policy continues. It was a very important conference to which people are always referring. It took place in December 2015, took place in Paris, and there was a very important agreement made that we should pursue a climate policy which would prevent the world to become the temperature to rise in excess of 1.5 centigrades. And everybody was very enthusiastic and very positive about the outcome of the conference. But will the planet now be safe? No, I don't think so. Paris is not more than a collection of declarations of intent by countries to reduce their CO2 emissions, and there are no sanctions in case of non-compliance. And according to the flawed climate models, there will be 0.16 degrees Celsius less warming in 2100 if all countries will keep their promises. And this is so little that it will not be detectable on thermometers. And what is the impact of Paris, the Agreement of Paris, on the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere? Here we see again the curve of the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. It's the black curve, and you see all the meetings which have taken place where new pledges were made and where new promises were published. And what we see is that it has no effect whatsoever on the slope of the curve. The concentration of CO2 is rising linearly, and it goes on and on and on. So what are my views on climate policy? I think that climate policy should not be based on flawed climate models, but on facts. And if we look at the facts, then we see that there is no climate crisis at all, and that CO2 is not the thermostat with which humans can control the climate. Climate change and protection of the environment should not be lumped together. Wind, solar energy, and biomass, which were wrongly supposed to reduce climate change, are destroying nature and the environment, and without a detectable impact on global warming. Moreover, because of their intermittent character, wind and solar are not able to supply a modern economy which requires secured demand-driven supply. And climate change requires adaptation to technology, and environmental pollution requires clean production technology. And that is why making a population poorer through pointless climate policies and unaffordable energy prices is naive and immoral. CO2 is not a harmful gas, and CO2 emissions are not environmental pollution. On the contrary, CO2 is a building block of life on planet Earth. And more CO2 in the atmosphere probably only causes modest warming, but it does ensure that the Earth becomes greener and that agriculture produces significantly more. So we should see CO2, we should perceive CO2 more as a blessing than as a curse, and we should be very happy with more CO2 instead of less. Only a prosperous nation can invest in climate adaptation and produce cleaner. And the conclusion is that the so-called net zero policy should be cancelled as soon as possible. Well, those are the things, the themes, the issues which we have dealt with in our recent book. And I hope that people will have so much interest in the issue that they will buy it and read it.
You're mentioning in your book that there is a page on the smog blog where they're kind of trying to smear you by saying, hey, look what Hans said.
But the smog blog, yeah, that's true. Yeah, the smog blog is very reliable in the sense that it deals with all the climate skeptics. And, it was, of course, the intention to say a few bad things on us, because we are supposed to be damaging the environment, damaging climate, and we are not very serious about these issues. Well, that's true. But on the other hand, the smog blog did publish quite a lot of good information about myself and my point of view. But nevertheless, it is completely contrary to the message of the smoke block itself. And a very peculiar point is that the smoke block is, as far as I know, the only prerogative manifestation of science debate in the world. There's no scientific discipline which which knows this phenomenon of trying to insult people with a different opinion. So it is a very peculiar thing which you only encounter in the climate debate.
In your book, you're talking about how people don't want to hear what you were saying about the economy because they're kind of canceling you because of your climate statements. Are you still being kind of shunned because of your climate statements, do you think? Or
Yes,
is that
that's correct. Yes, and not only me, but most of the people who are of the same conviction and who try to write about it have to do it via the social media and do not have access to the mainstream media, which is on the whole media who don't want to publish anything which runs counter to the official climate narrative. That is to say that we are confronting an imminent climate catastrophe, and that we have to pay a lot of money in order to fight climate change, in the sense that we have to pay more for electricity, more for petrol, more for gas, and that we have to use wind power and things like that. But then, of course, results in a tremendous increase of prices of energy. And as prices of energy are an important element of our consumption pattern, it also leads to very high inflation. Inflation has, of course, a little bit to do with Ukraine and the fact that we do not import any gas from Russia anymore, but the prices of energy were already rising before Ukraine started. That is to say that there were actually other factors which were at that time more dominant than Ukraine, because Ukraine did not start at that time. And I think that we should look at the way how the financial world has behaved. There's a philosophy within the financial world which is called ESG. That means environment, social, and governance. And that means that apart from profits, financial players have also pay heed to the environment, to climate, to social goals, and so on. But these are very vague. But it has led to some underinvestment in new energy exploration and exploitation, and that has had a devastating influence on energy prices.
I believe I read that you started out as kind of a believer in the narrative, but then you looked into the data and found out that it didn't hold up. Is that true?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you read the summaries policy for policymakers. At that time, I was policymaker, and I worked for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I studied these documents, and I read the summary for policymakers in the beginning of the 70s. It was no, it was the 80s, I believe. Never mind. But then I witnessed in 17 pages that they used the word uncertain, uncertainty, or synonyms 40 times or so. And I thought, as a reader, experienced reader of policy documents, well, these people are uncertain of their case. I took them seriously. But then the alarmists came, and they gained the leading position in the climate debate. And that was, of course, not based on the science of that time. And then, of course, there was a tendency in the reports, the successive reports of the IPCC, and these became longer, the longer alarmist. And if you look at the climate critical literature, then you see that it's not fact based.
So when you speak to people privately, is there any sort of dynamic where they tell you, I kind of agree with you, but I can't say that publicly?
Oh, yes, there are many scientists who have stated that in private conversations, and they think that it is not wise to come out of the closet because they will lose their reputations, and of course, in some cases also their source of income. They lose their job because they will be dismissed by their organizations, because all kinds of organizations are now in the same boat, and they all are true believers, as I may call them. For instance, also the European Central Bank and the Dutch Central Bank, organizations which have nothing to do with climate, they join the climate train, and it's really unbelievable for me as a objective watcher of all those developments that this is happening.
Yeah. So as I keep saying, this is one of those things that make me think that when it crumbles, it might crumble quickly with safety in numbers. Because I think so many people already are unbelievers in private. And once they see other people stepping up, that they might step up too and say, I don't believe in it.
Well, the point is that people have been indoctrinated for 2 or 3 decades, and it's between, it has sunk in. It's between their 2 years, as we say in the Netherlands. No, I think that it will be still an uphill battle. And, well, it is possible that, of course, the Nobel Prize winners in the world, these are changing their mind now also because they are studying it. Javer is one. And what was the other?
Clauser.
Clauser is one, yeah. And we have also a Dutch Nobel Prize winner who is among the climate realists, but he doesn't want to come out for it. So if these people are presenting their arguments in scientific circles, then of course there may be some movement away from the official climate narrative. But my feeling is that it may take many more years.
Do you have any other points you'd like to make before we wrap up?
No, I think, yeah, well, perhaps I think that we should be aware of the fact that there is a tendency, some movement in the scientific literature, which leads to a reassessment of the role of CO2. I see a certain greening of the scientific literature in the sense that CO2 is not considered to be a curse, but a blessing. Then, of course, there's another point, which is that there's more stress on the saturation of the CO2 effect on climate. That is to say that more and more CO2 offers less and less warming. And then, politically, we see that the West is isolated in the international climate debate, in the sense that only the West has a proactive climate policy. The rest of the world, of course, window dressing, green window dressing, that is very popular. But take, for instance, the big emitters like China and India and Russia, to some extent, these are not participating in a proactive anti-CO2 or Green Deal policy. So I think that, the movement and also now the Green Deal in Europe, because of the tendency to the right of the center, political parties which are emerging in Europe and will perhaps achieve a majority in the European Parliament, will also have an effect on the Green Deal and policies like these. So, on balance, I think that we are making progress. Also, many climate alarmists will not agree with me.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed hearing from you, Hans Labohm. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you very much.